Buonasera a tutti, herzlich willkommen. It is 4:15 p.m. in Rome, Berlin, Paris and Warsaw, and it's 5:15 p.m. in Jerusalem. Thank you for joining us live today. Welcome to this ESOF 2020 highlighted session on brain drain, brain gain and brain circulation. Greetings to the virtual audience who is joining us throughout the time zones, following live on YouTube, with the support of Elsevier and also following live on the ESOF website. Greetings to the audience attending us at Porto Vecchio in Trieste. It's a pity that we cannot be in this beautiful city, but that's the way it is. My name is Lucian Pujan. I'm going to be moderating today's session. I work with the German Academy of Sciences, Leopoldina, in science diplomacy and science management. And in my previous academic life, I have worked also on migration research at different European universities. Before we get started, let me just introduce briefly the conveners of today's special session, the panelists and the on-site facilitator. This session was convened by 6 prestigious organizations from 5 countries. The Italian Academy of Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, Accademia dei Lincei, the Israel Academy of Sciences and Humanities, the French Académie de Sciences Institut de France, the Italian National Research Council, CNR, and the German National Academy of Sciences, and the Polish Academy of Sciences. Many thanks to all the colleagues involved, and many thanks to the ESOF committee, Stefano Fantoni, Bruno Della Vedova, and all, for approaching us on this session and working with us together. The reason for the session is simple, but it's complicated at the same time. It is a key issue for the present and for the future European and global science, but not just for science, also for economy, politics, and society. And that, therefore, we must speak on it. This is another example where academies and research organizations pick up forward-looking topics and fundamental challenges. I welcome a panel of truly outstanding people, and I'm very happy that they are today with us. All have a vast international experience and all have somehow experienced brain circulation. So this panel is going to be lively, interactive, and focus on the people. I will start with what you see on the first slide with Ivan Djikic. He is a molecular biologist and medical scientist from the Goethe University in Frankfurt-Main in Germany. He's director of the Institute of Biochemistry II. He has a chair in molecular signaling and cancer research. So he explores a lot about cancer, molecular mechanisms, cellular signaling, and other things like ubiquitin signaling. His career is truly international. He started in Zagreb in Croatia with a medical degree, then University of New York School of Medicine in the lab of Joseph Schlesinger, and in Uppsala, and with some stations at EMBO and other international localities. I will not name them all. He has received an ERC advanced grant and numerous prizes, and now he's working in Frankfurt. He's also a member of the German Academy of Sciences and also of other academies. Also with us, I greet very warmly, is David Harel. He's a computer scientist working at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot, Israel, and he holds the William Sussner Professorial Chair for Mathematics. He is born in London, and then he's completed his PhD at the MIT in the US, worked in academia, private sector, IBM, Microsoft Research, also from NASA, and DigiSense in the UK, the US, France, Singapore, and Israel. He has co-founded the software company iLogix, which was bought by IBM, and he invented the graphical language of state charts, who has become a part of the UML standard. This is something which all of you who work in computer science should know. He has also a member of several scholarly societies, academies, and he's quite active in peace initiatives in the Middle East. Also with us today is Mario Pianta, an Italian economist, professor of economic policy at Scuola Normale Superiore in Florence, and also at the University of Urbino Carlo Bo. He's member of the Accademia Nazionale dei Lincei and also of the interdisciplinary center Beniamino Segre. He has worked a lot on European topics on economics of labor migration, innovation, development, and he has been advising both the Italian government, the European Commission, and other international organizations like the OECD, International Labour Organization, and so on. Also today with us from France, Edouard Brezon, a French theoretical physicist, is emeritus professor at the Paris 6 Pierre-Marie Curie University, currently at École Normale Supérieure in Paris. He worked a lot in physics and international environment, but most important also at the French Alternative Energies and Atomic Energy Commission. He has substantial contributions on physical properties of matter, macroscopic physical properties, and high energy physics. He was guest fellow at many universities abroad. I would just name a few: Princeton, Harvard, Oxford, and Amsterdam. He's past president of the Académie de Sciences, Institut de France, and active at the ICTP in Trieste, the International Center for Theoretical Physics. And also he was active in Cyprus with the Cyprus Research and Education Foundation. Today with us also Emilio Fortunato Campana from the National Council for Scientific Research, CNR in Italy, mechanical engineer, professor of mechanical and naval engineering, and director of the section Engineering, ICT, and Technologies of the CNR. He also heads the Marine Technology Institute in Rome. He has been involved in defense research, but also in naval research in several public-private partnerships, among other the so-called PPP vessels for the future. He received the NATO Scientific Award in 2012. And last but not least, from Poznan, not from Warsaw, joining us is Jacek Kolanowski, a Polish chemist and biologist, currently leader of the research group on molecular probes and prodrugs, Institute of Bioorganic Chemistry, Polish Academy of Sciences. His career started in Poland, then he moved to Lyon, where he did his PhD at the École Normale Supérieure, then went to Sydney, Australia, the other part of the world, and returned back to Poland to build his own lab and different other activities. He does cutting-edge research at the intersection of chemistry, cellular biology, and molecular sensing. And he also has built up in Poznan the Center for High Through-Output Screening Studies, and he's also a member of the Polish Young Academy. Now, we will stop the screen sharing and switch to general view. Please also, I just want to mention also Stephen Taylor, who is our on-site facilitator at Porto Vecchio in Trieste. Stephen is a well-known international manager in science and technology, and he's currently leading the innovation and complex system structure at Area Science Park in Trieste. Ladies and gentlemen, you might be wondering why we have a man-only panel. Well, COVID has affected our life in an unprecedented way, and this applies to science, travel, and our personal health. So even in harsh conditions, we decided to have this panel in the virtual space, and we had to accept that 3 female invited scientists who would have joined us today could not attend anymore. So I kindly ask you for understanding on this, and I just want to reiterate firmly on behalf of all conveners, the 6 organizations, that we know very much that we still need a much better balance in science and innovation, a gender balance, and not just in science and innovation, in many other areas as well. So let's get started. Today we are going to talk about brain drain, brain gain, and brain circulation. Brain migration, as let's say a terminus for all, it's a migratory phenomenon, not of the past years, but with a long history, with implications to countries, individuals, and economies, and it's often overloaded with current politics, media, society narratives, and many other things. So today we want to get rid of this overload and of flower speech, and to try to speak more frankly about the issue. When we try to analyze this from different points of view, migration research, science policy, economics, and so on, at one point we get lost in translation. What does it mean? That we speak about the same things and we actually do not speak about the same things. For example, when we talk about brain circulation, some might say it's about people going abroad, staying and working for a certain period of time in one country and then going back to their home countries. Well, at the same time, other people understand completely different things, understand a truly international scientific career with several stages in different parts of the world, and then being part of an international global academic diaspora. Also, when we talk about processes, we mean actually problems and structural problems of completely another kind. When we talk about brain drain, but we actually mean the science divide, for example, in Europe between the East and the West. It's not the same with the brain drain, and brain drain is maybe just a small symptom of a larger problem. We want to make the matter more authentic. So scientists who have experienced migration in international environments, then we will have a first round of questions, some questions from the audience, a second rapid round of questions, and then say goodbye. So please join us with questions, please be active, and let us talk about this. One more thing I want to say, because one of the speakers who should have been part of our panel, Astrid Demirguc-Kunt from the World Bank, chief economist, we had some exchange in preparation of the session, and she said, Lucian, I'm going to tell you some messages from our research on brain circulation so far. And I just want to leave them in the room as a reflection. Every migrant and refugee has a different story. So it's a personal decision to emigrate. This is maybe in the cases when people risk their lives, like in persecuted scientists or in war areas. Things look much more different if somebody can choose which university he or she is going to attend. The only certainty is that global migration is here to stay. Current problems show that policy makers cannot fight labor markets or the push or pull forces behind migration. Those forces are too strong and they need to be properly managed. And we don't have the answer yet. We talk a lot about measures to foster brain circulation, to balance brain drain and brain gain, but we don't have the secret recipe yet. Brain migration is a symptom for a troubled situation. It's not the disease, it's a symptom. Scientists and highly skilled are different types of migrants. Why? Because they have different assets and different expectations, especially when it comes to meritocracy, life-work balance, or security for them and for the children. Migration is at the end a truly personal decision. So therefore, we want to hear the story of the people. I will go now and introduce the first speaker that we will have today. And the first question is going to go to Ivan Dzikic. Ivan Dzikic, dobar dan, guten tag. Dobro došli na ovom panelu. Hvala što ste se nam pridružili. Ivan, could you say something about how your international career looked like? And when you look back, what are the decisions that influenced the most the way your career evolved? So please.
Thank you very much, Lucian. Thanks for the introduction. Nice words in Croatian as well. This gives you this homey feeling. And I will start my story by being born in Croatia, finishing medical school there in early 90s. And then my entire career is migratory type, but it's all driven by curiosity. And it's all driven by my will and wish to learn more and to learn at the places where atypical, anti-dogmatic. So just briefly, after finishing medical school, I really wanted to do molecular medicine and decided to join Josef Schlesinger at NYU in New York, where I finished 5 years of postdoctoral training. And as soon as I was ready to take an independent position, there were a lot of options in America. Yet I wanted to go to Europe because I felt European science market is blossoming and it's getting a future. That was 1997. Decided to go to Sweden in a small city, Uppsala, which is very well known culturally as well as historically for incredible science. Pharmacia, one of the big pharma companies, was born there by creativity of local scientists. Spent in Sweden from 97 to 2002, 5 beautiful years, started a family, started an independent professional life as one of the most important career steps in my life as being independent scientist. And then in 2002, we as family decided to move to Germany, since then. We are in Frankfurt. I'm incredibly happy being at the medical faculty, but being surrounded by physicists, chemists, and mathematicians around the world. Frankfurt is truly an international city in Germany, city where you really come not only by the airport, but you also come out by blending the history, blending the cultures. And I feel here at home. I feel amazingly well here, supportive, and this creates creativity on my side. And therefore, our scientific success is also dependent on these moves which we made. But I have this curiosity-driven internal drive, and which did not allow me to stay in Frankfurt and just relax. So I decided in 2002, to take a position also as a professor at medical school in Split in Croatia, where I have been teaching students for 17 years completely voluntarily, helping my own country with my own knowledge, not only doing teaching, but also setting up labs, setting up conferences. And I'm so proud of that. And this has been also resonating very well with Croatia. And when we discuss, I will make this point of the virtual brain circulation. You can be anywhere in the world, yet you can make an impact on the country where you're coming from, where you were before, and where you are now. And in 2016, I wanted to learn more from pharma world. So I decided to move to Genentech and Stanford as a sabbatical year, where I stayed additional 2 years with Genentech, just having a lab, small lab, being a senior scholar, while maintaining my lab in Frankfurt. And since the beginning of this year, we are back completely. I am now having a lab in Frankfurt, having a outstation lab also in Max Planck here in Frankfurt. So my scientific career has not only been geographically split between different states and continents, but also even within one city, I'm trying to have this outstation lab such that I can combine different technologies for the best of science.
And Ivan, this is really impressive. I mean, you had a real journey as a scientist, and I think this is the most important thing. And the second most important thing which strikes to me is the fact that you never lost your connection to your home country, Croatia. And I know from personal talks with you, and also from reading the press, because by fortune I speak also Croatian, I know that you're very active there. And I think this is important that you have maintained this link. But when you look back, is it anything that you would have done different?
I mean, one doesn't look back because I'm happy with my past. I'm happy with things that I did well. Obviously, some things you also have, negative experiences. But negative experiences make you better. When you fail, you also grow. And I think this COVID crisis that we are now in, this actually is a beautiful example how in a crisis, we all can come out better. I mean, I was this morning giving an interview directly to Zagreb about how our institute has converted from the cancer research since February now to August, September. Within 6 months, 2 groups, my group and Christian Moon's group, we have published 3 big discoveries by using technologies from cancer to discover something in COVID. They were published in 2 in Nature and 1 in Molecular Cell. Fantastic stories. Never ever in the history of science we have managed so fast and so high to come out with the knowledge which can only come out by learning from a past, from all these negative experiences, but always trying to look better, trying to be better, not only locally where we work, but also making an impact on Croatia, making an impact on the US, where I have a lot of colleagues and friends, as well as Sweden.
Okay, so it's a lot also about the possibility to react quickly to changed dynamics, framing, and so on. So it's interesting because you are an example of combining international pathway and reaction to things that we did not expect, like COVID-19. Ivan, we will talk again later. I just want to give the opportunities also to the next speaker to say some things. David Harel, Shalom, Ve'erev Tov, Bruchim, Havaim Lepanel Aizeta. I hope it was right. I have consulted with somebody yesterday evening about that. David, you are a computer engineer and a mathematician. For me, it's a wonderful combination because computer scientists just need the internet. At least this is what the rest of the people thinks, but I know that it's not like that. And mathematics is also a philosophy of life. So it's an interesting combination. Your career has led you from Europe, Israel, to the US, to the Americas and back. So you have experienced very different environments. And you know, in Europe, we tend to compare those environments all the time. Maybe you can give us an insight on how your career pathway has developed and which part or which step in your career has brought you the most in research and also in personal development. David.
Thank you. Your Hebrew is great. And thanks for inviting me to this panel. Well, actually, my story is a little less exciting than it might seem from your introduction, because just about a week ago, I celebrated 40 years at the Weizmann Institute. So I've really been, and I was listening to Ivan, who said something, I think you said something about not wanting to stay in Frankfurt and just relax. I think that was the phrase that you used. And I've been at Weizmann for 40 years and I haven't relaxed for a single minute. So it's possible to carry out research, extensive research and international collaborations, even if you are really stuck at one institution. But my career started in pure mathematics. I wanted to do a master's thesis in topology, but I quickly switched to computer science, theoretical computer science at Tel Aviv University. And anticipating one of your next questions, one of the main decisions I made very, very early on was to go to MIT for my PhD, which turned out to be an excellent decision, not only because it was the United States and MIT, but because it was a totally different environment with people who were working in areas I was interested in. And I did my PhD very quickly, mainly not because I was so smart, but mainly because I had two small children. And I really had to finish a PhD in order to start earning some money to put bread on the table. And I did 2 more years from 1978 to 1980, doing, again, pure theoretical mathematical computation research at IBM at Yorktown Heights until 1980. And then, as I said, 40 years ago, August 1980, I joined the Weizmann Institute. The interesting point was I did this together with 3 additional colleagues. I think one of whom everyone here would recognize the name of is Adi Shamir from the Vivest Shamir Edelman cryptography, Amir Pnueli, who passed away about 10 years ago, and Shimon Ullman. And the 4 of us essentially founded the computer science kernel at the Weizmann Institute. That turned out to be a very wise step, I guess on behalf of our institute, because it really started what I think is an extraordinary computer science group, present company excluded at the Weizmann Institute. Since then, I have in fact been in many places, but usually it was either as a sabbatical at Carnegie Mellon, Cornell, University of Edinburgh, and many, many times short 2 or 3 month visits to various places in the world to enrich myself. But my anchor has always been at the Weizmann Institute. And lately, I've been also spending quite a bit of time at the Israel Academy. I've been vice president there for the last 5 years. So I also get to deal together with other members of the Academy with issues of brain drain and brain gain. It's also worth mentioning, because you talked about academia and the private sector, that I was involved in 2.5 startups. The half is because something is beginning to happen right now. Which one of them turned out to be pretty successful. This was the company that was later sold to IBM. But in this session, it's very important for me to make clear that I never, ever even considered leaving my academic position, even with like leave without pay for a couple of years in order to spend full time in industry. So I always spent a few hours a week, maybe 1 day a week at these companies, sometimes even less than that. But I retained my academic position, full-time research career at Weizmann ever since. And Israel is in a way a strange place, because it gives the impression that there's a lot of international science going on there. But the main problem in Israel is not the brain gain, it's the brain drain, because we have many, many extraordinary Israelis who have chosen for good reasons to spend their career outside of Israel, which is fine. One of them, again, coming back to Ivan's speech or answers a few minutes ago, Yossi Schlesinger, who was on the faculty of our institute and for whatever reasons decided to leave and still carrying out an extraordinary career in the United States. And there are many people like that, and that is fine. So in this way, our country is contributing also physically many scientists to other places in the world. We have a problem in getting people to come back to Israel, but that's an issue for maybe a separate question.
Yeah. Thank you, David. Sorry if I interrupted you. There is always some milliseconds or a second, depending on internet speed. I thank you very much for sharing us these thoughts with you. I take the fact that you are a person who understands the international dimension as something self-understood. So scientists should pursue international contacts, going abroad for a certain period of time, coming back, involving in different networks and in different, let's say, in different environments. And the second thing I take is that you also have to be to follow some risks when you go with startups, when you go with collaboration with economy, with industry, with business. It's always, let's say, a bidirectional, not a unilateral relationship. I take these two messages with you, and maybe in the second round we can talk about that, and we can talk about the Israeli example and what you said about the misconception that many people have that Israel is only attracting people and not losing. So maybe we can also talk about that. I would like now to go to the next speaker, Jacek Kolanowski. Also try to greet you in Polish. Dzień dobry, witamy w panelu. Dzisiaj z nami. For me, it's easier because it's a Slavic language. Jacek, you represent, and please don't mind if I say that, it's a compliment, let's say the emerging leaders in science or the younger generation, especially natural science, in your case, biology and chemistry. Science has brought you throughout the world, from Poland to France to Australia and back to Poland. So one might say you are also somebody who has re-migrated back to his country. And this is particularly interesting in science and research and innovation. I know that you are also an intercultural person and you're a pioneer in your field. You try to do things, really, things that you can see, that you can work on. In Poznan and building your labs and so on. So Jacek, could you describe shortly, briefly, your way through science so far, and what were the reasons for you to return to Poland?
Thank you, Lucian. Thanks for inviting me to this panel as well. It's a great pleasure to be among such a distinct speakers. So I'm a little bit timid because of this, and I feel, that I have still a lot to live up to, looking at the distinguished speakers around. But indeed, I think since I was a teenager, actually, I really wanted to travel, to see the world. It's excited me a lot, and I actually did international baccalaureate because of this in Poland. But after that, it was quite a financial strain to go and study abroad straight after. So I started studying in Poland, but then I took opportunities to go to Germany several times during my studies, also using Erasmus program, which many younger people probably also are very aware of and took advantage of as well. And then after that, I got a stipend to move to France with Ligue Nationale contre le Cancer, and I studied at the École Normale Supérieure de Lyon, where I did my PhD. I completed it in 2013, actually, and then I got another fellowship from the French Foundation to go to Australia to do my one-year postdoc. So it was quite interesting. A Polish person who was finishing PhD in France got money from France to go to Australia to do research. So it was quite interesting. And And I was a beneficiary.
Sorry for interrupting, Jacek. I didn't know that, but that's really interesting. Maybe we can talk about that later.
Yeah, and so I was a beneficiary of this approach there, and then I had a chance to move to Australia, and then I was hired there from their like local money, I would say. And then after doing postdoc there, I accepted a independent position in Poland, where I have my own group now, and I also developed a Center for High Throughput Screening Studies, which is more like a core facility for advanced technologies to look for the bioactive molecules. I always wanted to go back, so I wanted to go out. I wanted to do something, learn as much as possible, and then come back and actually bring back the knowledge to my community and to build up on that. And to be fair, I felt so comfortably in Australia that I already felt that if I stayed there longer, I probably would not want to move. So I thought that's the last moment for me to do that and try to do that in Poland. And it was particularly difficult because my partner is Australian as well. So that was a big of a bargain there to do that. But we managed to, I'm very grateful that we tried this. And I'm very happy where I am. And I also try to be involved not only in science, but also in science policy and other things like that in Polish Academy of Sciences. And the main reasons why I would come back, so as I told you, probably the first one was that I still had this in mind that I should probably give back something, and I wanted to give back something to the community here and recreate something which I've learned abroad in my original way in Poland. But it was also actually a thought over the decision. I looked into the parameters like economy, meaning the money in research. And I have to tell you that when I actually calculated that for young scientists at the moment when I was moving back, the possibility of research funding in Poland was similar to the one in Australia. So I found it very attractive. And to be honest, I think this is very important because in Poland, actually salaries of scientists, even advanced scientists, basic salaries are really low. And the only way to actually get the normal life there is to get grants from which you can supplement your salaries. So without these grant opportunities, I think it would be very difficult for people to move back. But that was the reason, and probably one which cannot be omitted is the independence. So I really sought for being independent, and in Poland, actually, there are only very few places where that was possible at my stage of career. So I picked very carefully the place, and I did this move very consciously to be able to do things on my own now.
Okay, Jacek, thank you very much. It's a really interesting story, and I'm absolutely sure it's not over yet. It's going to go from here to hopefully to high horizons. It's interesting also the fact what you said that you received French money, let's put it this way, to make brain circulation. This is something maybe to worth considering on. I would like now to give a perspective, a different perspective, and this comes from Emilio Fortunato Campana. Buonasera Emilio Campana, benvenuti su questo panello con noi oggi. Emilio, you are an engineering sciences, and I have worked with engineers in my let's say my professional life so far, and I know you see things different, in a different way. I don't know how to explain it, but it's a different approach on many things. You have worked also in international collaborative projects, like with many countries involved, with people from different nationalities. And you are now quite active in the science management branch at the CNR. And CNR is basically the biggest Italian research organization and one of the biggest in Europe. So could you, Emilio, describe a little bit your path through science and science management, and then also having in mind the fact that we are living in times of pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemics, and unfortunately, in our mind, this is connected also with pictures that we have seen in Italy, in Spain, in China, but particularly in Italy, because we speak to you as an Italian. How do you think that this has changed our approach to the migration of high-skilled and talented people? Emilio, please.
Okay. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Now,
introduction in Italian. You don't hear me?
now we hear you again. There was a short.
Okay. Okay. So, well, after I got my degree and PhD in fluid dynamics, went working for IBM at the European Center for Scientific and started with
Emilio, sorry to interrupt. There seems to be a problem with your headset because we only get fragments of what you're saying.
Let me try to remove my headset.
Maybe speak freely on the computer audio.
You hear me now?
Yes, much better. Yeah.
Any better?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So let me adjust just the volume. Okay. So, so I went working for the IBM. For the IBM European Center for Scientific and Engineering Computing. And after an intense period, very funny, I mean, very amusing, because I was working with the first IBM parallel machine, mainframe, water-cooled. I decided that I didn't want to work for IBM, I wanted to work for my country, public system of research. So I joined the National Research Council, eventually the researcher, eventually becoming a director of my institute. And my field was marine and maritime engineering. So, and the good news is that the sea and the oceans are all over the world. So ships are built all over the world. So I started traveling and working with teams spread in many different continents. And I have enlarged my views, and I spend most of my time different countries working with large teams. I've been a principal investigator in several European Defense Agency projects, because of course ships are for commercial use or also for defense. So I project with the US Navy, and then I've been working with the NATO. This is what brought me into contact with international collaboration, large teams, different countries, mostly US and then Asia. I think I visited Japan more than 30 times. But this is for what was my past. Then a few years ago, I decided to run for an open competition for the department head for engineering, ICT, energy, and transport at the CNR. And this is quite the largest department at CNR. It has more than 50 sites spread all over Italy, about 1,100 researchers covering different topics, industrial and civil engineer, computer science, informatics, system and communication engineering, applied mathematics. So this was a completely different experience for me. And I decided that I was not happy with the shape of my department. So I decided to reshape my department and the institute. So I tried to look back to my experience and trying to learn from what I saw in different countries. And so I reshaped the structure of my department quite deeply. So this is just for my past experience.
Emilio,
the second question was how COVID is
yes,
acting. Okay. So, well, I want to introduce something that I was expecting to say later, but right before the COVID explosion, I decided to introduce some national virtual lab. Because by chance, a few months before the COVID pandemic. So these virtual labs, I can work together with the researchers coming from different towns, from different disciplines. So it's a very multidisciplinary environment. And then it was a useful tool during the pandemic. We can work on large strategic projects. I will explain it maybe later, but for sure, we discovered that the digital infrastructure is fundamental to our modern society. This is clear, and this is also can possibly reduce at least some of the brain circulation, brain drain, because you can work and you can really be close to your colleagues also in a remote way, in a controlled remote way.
Okay, Emilio, it's interesting to see that, I mean, every crisis also has some, let's say, chances and some possibilities in it. I think it's for science, it has been not only for science, but also, for example, for schools and many other public services. It was a real boost for digitization and switching very rapidly into the virtual world. And let us see how the future will look like for virtual formats like this and more complicated like your lab, and where you also have security issues, cybersecurity issues, and also intellectual property issues, all the things that hang together. But yeah, this will most probably influence the international mobility. We can also talk later about that in the second round of questions. I would like now to pass to Edouard Brezan. Bonjour. Bienvenue dans ce panel aujourd'hui. Merci de nous avons rejoints. Edouard Brezan, you are probably in this panel the person who has, let's say, the most years of scientific experience in many different contexts. You are a theoretical physicist, and you have gone through different stages, as I told you as I told to everyone in your biography: US, UK, Netherlands, Middle East, Cyprus, Italy, and back to France. You have won different prizes, international renowned prizes, but you have also been involved a lot in the Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, probably one of the first big international research organization. I think it was created in the 60s, 63, 64, more or less. And this was one example of trying to internationally network this community of physics, also with developing countries, which was the terminology used then to describe the global south, or the countries who are not industrialized yet. So, Edouard Brezan, with your experience, how do you see let's say the general evolution of scientific mobility throughout the decades? Because why I'm asking this, you know, we always speak about brain drain, brain gain as being things which are very urgent today, but actually they have happened before. Isn't it true?
Of course, if we go back to history, we have to remember that in the 30s, for political reasons, many scientists in Europe left before the disaster. So there is a long history of scientists in exile. We should not forget that in our time, with the trouble of our world, independently of the pandemics, we see a lot of colleagues who have to leave their country if they want to remain free and do their job and do science. These countries like Syria, Turkey, Iran, and others we see, and a lot of European countries, including France, are trying to help these people. So scientists in exile is also a case of mobility that we should not forget, because it's part of our time. Now, in addition to that, there is, of course, mobility throughout the world. And you have mentioned the ICTP, the International Center of Theoretical Physics, which was created about 50 years ago by Abdus Salam, who was a professor in London, but who was a Pakistanis, the Nobel laureate, a great scientist. And he had this view that one should create a center in which people from the East and West and North and South could meet. And it's still true. It's still the only place I know where you can see so many color, genders together and working together. So it's still a remarkable place. It's It belongs to UNESCO and the Italian government and the International Atomic Energy Commission. And there are about 5,000 scientists everywhere passing through the ICTP in Trieste. So it's a very important organization, and it has played a central role during the worst period of Cold War that we have had. Now, speaking of today, we are threatened of a new Cold Wars. We have seen that the US and China are splitting apart in dangerous ways. And I wonder whether this will have an influence on scientific exchange in the same way that the Cold War had during the 60s and 70s between Eastern Europe and the rest of the world. China, I mean, it's interesting to watch the history of the scientific international exchanges of China over the century. I've been involved with China for more than 40 years now in various capacities. Initially, China was sending a few postdoc or doctoral students abroad, mainly in the US, but not only in the US. And there were fears because they were not coming back. Progressively, China managed to offer very decent position so that they, in some sense, they didn't stop the brain drain, but they gave positions to people to return to their countries. And as a result, you can see that the best Chinese university like Tsinghua, Fudan, etc., are in the top of the world nowadays. And this, I think, is the result of a clever politic of China. The reason I'm speaking of it is that now I'm scared, because with the recent policy of the present Chinese government, I think that some of the Chinese people that I know who are at the moment abroad can consider twice returning back to China, given that it's not a free country, or it's less and less a free country. So I think freedom is essential, and whenever people are given means to travel and to return, then the policy of freedom of circulation is really a win-win situation. May I also add that in the 1948 Declaration, Universal Declaration of United Nations, the Article 13 mentioned that the freedom of establishing, of leaving one's country is given to every one of the countries who have recognized this declaration. China was not part of it.
Thank you, Edouard Prezant. I think it's you are pushing the discussion in the let's say in the direction where we must think also about the setting, the environment. And I will never forget, one of my academic mentors said to me, you must have freedom to be creative, to be innovative, to be curious. And I didn't get it then. I was a young student. I didn't understand what he was saying. I came from a communist country, and I thought freedom was something completely different, like eating chocolate or banana or things like that. But freedom is essential to a scientific career, and also to international scientific mobility and cooperation. And I think we should never be tired of saying this again and again. And what you said, of course, it's interesting to see how things will develop. So we draw the conclusion from your intervention that this is not new, what is happening to us, the brain circulation. It's maybe an updated situation. We have COVID-19. We will see how this will influence the scientific world. We will see how many students will go from Asia to the US, to Europe and back. We just need a bit more patience to see how things will develop. But I think it will have an influence. We just need to figure it out. And what you also said, and Jacek also said, is what I sense a little bit, please correct me all if it's a bad word, a sort of, you know, patriotism or love for somebody's country. when you decide to go back or when you decide to connect with your peers in your country of origin. And I think in Europe we have a completely different discussion on this sentimental connection to the place where someone was born. I think in the US it's completely different, and I know it's completely different. Maybe we can think about this later. Now I just want to say an interim conclusion, and I would like to give the word to Mario Pianta. Buonasera a lei, Mario Pianta. La ringrazio molto per essere con noi oggi. I know that you are somebody, and that's why I'm very glad that you are in our panel, who can translate what scientists think, wish, to policies and to the way policies are implemented. And you have quite a big experience in labor markets research, in economics research. You have worked with international organizations like the European Commission, the OECD, the International Labour Organization, so you know how those international multilateral organizations work and how their internal life is. And we have now testimonials, more or less. We can call them testimonials or really personal, authentic contributions from scientists. How would you try to frame what we heard into the global discussion on brain drain, brain gain, brain circulation? Mario, please.
Thank you for this opportunity to have a very important discussion. I will use some slides to sum up the core arguments that I can make. Unfortunately, the great fascinating experiences by the panel we have just heard are not the same for the generality of researchers who are traveling across from one country to another. In our detailed statistics about researchers, mobility, publications, research and development efforts in all countries, we can get now a very detailed picture of what's happening. There is clearly a very strong brain circulation, but there are increasingly strong and growing asymmetries between countries. Some countries are slipping down into a brain drain dynamics with a net loss of researchers, PhD students, as well as more advanced scholars. And here is not really a matter of individual decisions, even though individual preferences matter to some extent, but the systemic characteristics of the science and technology system in a country, the amount of resources, the amount of recognition of merit as a criteria for career advancement, the job opportunities, the quality of employment, the level of wages are all factors that are increasingly important in this context. We have done some detailed studies using a project for the European Commission, considering several hundreds Italian researchers that were carrying out their work abroad, outside Italy, and comparing their characteristics with what was happening with Italian researchers staying in Italy. And we found basically that first, the amount of out-migration has been massively increasing, especially after the 2008 financial crisis and the ensuing decade of austerity policies, cutbacks in public resources for research, and stagnation in the economies, not just of Italy, but of Southern European countries as a whole, and in many cases of Eastern European countries as a whole. What we see that now is that there is still a very strong interaction with people moving in and out, but in the case of Italy, there is on most countries a 20% loss. We have 120 people moving out and 100 people coming back in terms of movement of researchers active in this field. But the aggregate numbers are worrying. We have had 13,000 people with university degrees emigrating out of Italy per year in the last decade almost. And if we take the period between 2008 and 2019, we estimate that we have 14,000 Italian PhD holders who have migrated abroad after their PhD acquisition. The interesting result of our study is that Italian researchers abroad and do not differ in terms of education, capabilities, and motivation. What matters are the systemic characteristics: access to funding, wages, career prospect, and the importance of merit. And I guess this is an important message for all countries with a significant research system, but which have been experiencing cutbacks and a reduction of this. We have also some consideration of the post-COVID effects, but we can discuss this later, perhaps.
Okay. To the technicians, can we switch back? Professor Penta, maybe you can
Yes.
Stop your share, okay, so that we can switch back to the... Okay, thank you very much. I think it was an interesting interim conclusion, and I take two important words: systemic problems, and what I said at the beginning, and what was the message from the group of people, the World Bank dealing with brain circulation and brain drain, was that brain drain is a symptom for a systemic or more deeper rooted problem. And the second is the issue of merit and nepotism and everything connected to it, the issue of standards being just on paper or being sometimes eluded. And I come to the next round of questions, and this one would be a bit more shorter, so please, we are a little bit late, a few minutes late beyond schedule, to give more concentrated answers if it's possible. I will start with with Ivan Djikic and Jacek Koronowski. You both come from countries that have experienced and are experiencing brain drain in different intensity, Poland and Croatia. Although Poland has experienced also some remigration of highly talented, highly skilled people. Ivan, what is the situation in Croatia and in Southeastern Europe? And why are those talented people leaving? And what is, in your opinion, what are the main issues that need to be changed to keep them in the country or even to attract them coming back? Please.
The issue of all of these countries is the problem of a system. There is a lack of trust of young people in the long commitment of the system to preserve their chance to express their talents. And for that reason, if you would ask now many young people from all Southeastern Europe to do statistics, I believe results would be very negative in saying, yes, we don't trust our current system and we go to the countries where we believe that the grants, our chances for us professionally and for family would be better. In my own experience, I also have seen many young people coming from Croatia to my own lab, and I always promote them, you should go back, learn here, go back. But statistics are close to 100%. Everybody wants to stay in the environment where their talents are appreciated, where they have a fair chance and they don't need to fight against the system.
Sorry, I forgot to turn off my microphone. I think it's, you addressed there some of the important things. So we go back to the system and to the lack of trust, because usually, you know, in some media or public narratives, people who decide to leave the country, Eastern Europe, Southeastern Europe, Central Europe, they say, okay, they go for the money, because of course we cannot, our country will never ever keep up with the UK or Germany or Netherlands or France in terms of payments. But as Jacek also said, it's only one part of the problem. And Jacek, I just want to say, to ask you, what is the Polish view or the Polish experience on this case? Poland has experienced, right after the accession to the European Union, an outflow of talents. I have been to Ireland, to the UK, and I know very well established Polish communities, but I also know many people working in science and technology. And now things seem to be changing. It's not always only about Brexit or other insecurities, but it seems to be a trend. Is it or is it not? Share us your thoughts, please, on this. Jacek.
So thanks. So I asked some people from Polish Academy of Sciences to help me with the data collection for this panel here. But there's so much data that I think we should make probably a separate talk about this. So I just want to focus on maybe 2 or 3 particular things. So one is definitely there is a outflow of the skilled workers still from Poland, and this happens, and there is 400,000 people with higher education, Polish people living abroad in the other European countries now. So it's a huge number. It's unbelievable when you compare it to some other things, and those people are living abroad. And what I think is that this has not only negative consequences for Poland, but it has negative consequences for the whole European Union. This movement, one directional movement of people from the Eastern Europe or Southern Europe to Western and North, leads to the situation where we actually almost make dead the communities which are left behind. And we stop having an opportunity to draw from these pools of people, of talent, and because we are only focusing on these few countries which do well. And then all this development, everything happens in there, and people who don't have chances and don't have opportunities in these other countries are left without them, because the best people or most clever people or whatever we call them, they move back and they move away and don't come back, so no one is there to help them. So I think we are all losing on that, actually, that we should all be thinking about also creating opportunities for people in the place where they are growing and developing, to be able to experience. But it's not only people from this country. We should also probably encourage people from other countries to move to here. I don't mind, really. I really believe in the brain circulation in a way that you can make decisions. You should be able to make decisions, go wherever you feel comfortable, and make your life there. And I see the great advantage of being immersed in different environments one by one, and getting this amazing experiences in different places. But it doesn't have to be, no one should force Polish people to go back to Poland. Why not just make opportunities there, maybe for people from Germany to feel like, oh, Poland is also a good place to go there, right? So, but one of the main reasons why people don't come back or don't move to Poland, still, despite the fact what you've said before, statistics and some surveys from the Poland, so the Polish Diaspora organization shows that they still say that the reasons why they don't come back, for 100% of them actually, is economic reasons. And half of them say they would like to go back, but they are worried about this economy. And the other half says economic reasons are one of the reasons, but we don't want to come back also because of the socio-political difference in Poland versus other places where we are in. And I think this is, I don't want to further go into that because the time is short, but I think we should keep that in mind, that economic equality is very important. And if we don't distribute it evenly, we lose a pool of people from these countries. But at the same time, there are socioeconomic differences, which might, you can call it freedom of choice or whatever else, which might also lead to these lack of willingness to going back or move.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an interesting example, because I hear a lot about Poland from people who are not from Poland or didn't experience this kind of connections on the issue of returnees and brain migration. I think you have mentioned some important things. It's about the social political situation, the whole situation. It's about tapping the chances that possibly some people don't.
Maybe just one comment, if I may, that the economy, so the grants which Poland was able to offer returning people or new scientists who are moving to Poland, thanks to the European Union funding, actually made it very attractive for many people to move. So the tiny movement back was because of this. So let's keep in mind that this is a strategy which might work. Of course, there are other things which you have to think of, but this is, in my opinion, a strategy which might be efficient.
Yeah, and this completes, well, I mean, it's a challenge for every country and also for the European Union, and probably also for the US and China to design their own brain circulation strategies, because there are so many implications. And at the end of the design, there is the scientist, his family, his children, his aspirations. And so what you said, you cannot force people to come back to Poland or to stay there or to go, I don't know where. You can only do that if you're not a free country, and we don't want to go there. We should be a bit careful with the time. I would go to the Israel example. David, you said also in your introduction that Israel is also facing a lot of brain drain or people going outside, especially to the US. Could you explain a little bit more how is this happening? And say something on our, let's say, general perception that Israel is attracting a lot of people, and on the numbers, which are facts, that Israel is one of the highest performance in innovation, science, and research.
Yes, so it's two different separate issues. First of all, we have a lot of brain drain. I think one of the reasons is because it's a very small country. We have only 7 or 8 universities and several colleges, and there simply is not enough place. There are not enough positions for high quality scientists to carry out academic careers in Israel. So a lot of them leave to go abroad. Of course, there is also a lot of attraction in the United States and in many European countries. So if I may use the term, we contribute many people to many other countries. The other side of the coin, however, is the fact that it is very, very difficult, almost impossible, to attract non-Israelis to come for full-time, long-term research careers in Israel, for the very simple reason that except for our own institute, the Weizmann Institute, which is essentially a graduate school with a research institution and no undergraduates, all the other academic institutions do everything in Hebrew. So Lucian, for example, your Hebrew short introduction to me earlier on was wonderful, but you would have a very difficult time trying to study in Israel or to even carry out research in Israel, because everything is done in Hebrew. At Weizmann, we are able to attract a few people from outside Israel. So the main problem that we face is not attracting international researchers like the people we see on the screen here and their own students, but to try to attract the best Israeli academics to return to Israel after their postdocs and come back to Israel. And one of the interesting things is that in the natural sciences, experimental scientists, most universities all but require that a scientist do his or her postdoc abroad. So people finishing a PhD in Israel will typically go to the best laboratory they can find abroad and carry out a 2 or 3 year postdoc, and then many of them would like to return to Israel. And of course, the situation is that not everyone can return. And echoing some of the things that were described about Poland, our political and international situation in Israel is not the most attractive to many people. Maybe in parentheses, I should say that the minute we finish this panel, I am rushing off to Jerusalem to take part in one of the big rallies against our government. This is part of my peace and human rights activities, which take up a lot of my time. And many of us actually have critical opinions about what goes on in Israel. And this has ramifications also to the way science is carried out. And in my role as Vice President of the Israel Academy, this tension surfaces quite often, and one has to do what one can in order to try to attract people to come, and at the same time try to find ways to make the political situation in Israel more attractive to investors, more attractive to academics, more attractive to good science.
Thank you also for this very personal input. But we are again at the systemic issue, at the general picture, at the socio-economic picture, at the, let's say, all those things that contribute for someone at the end of the day to make the balance and say, should I stay or should I go or should I return? And I think we are getting closer to one of the most important issues. Emilio, I wanted to go to you with a question about what David also said. In Italy, we had the impression that it's a quite homogeneous scientific community, and also the issue of the language and the so-called internationalization at home in research organization and in university. So if you don't speak Italian, I don't know if you will have that good opportunities to enter the research system. Is it true? Do you have those problems, and what do you do to attract internationally people in all disciplines, not just engineering? Please turn off your microphone, Emilio.
Sorry. That's a very good question. Very good question. Okay, so let's say that first of all, Italy does invest very few resources on research and innovation. So if we compare what Italy spends in terms of a percentage of the gross product, GDP, it's only 1.3% of the GDP compared to Japan, which is 3.6, Germany, which is 2.9, Israel is about 4.1, France is 2.3, the US is 2.7. So we are not spending on research and innovation, first of all. Second of all, in Italy, we have lower wages, even when normalized with respect to the average life cost. A third reason is that we do not have a very attractive recruitment policy. So, unfortunately, I must say that both governments of center-right coalitions and center-left coalition, they failed in respecting their promises that they've done during the electoral campaign in taking care of the national research system and academia. So I guess that Mario can also comment on that, but the situation is, for sure, we have to change, because even if we are losing a lot of people that we are training, and we are training seriously them. They went abroad and they find good places to work. So it's a pity, and I don't see any specific change with respect to. I mean, if we look back. There was a book that it was called "Look Back in Anger." So if we look back, the situation doesn't change. It seems worse and worse every year. So I'm quite skeptical that we are going to see in a few years any, say, a turning point on that. So Italy has to move, because otherwise we are going to. That's my cat. Otherwise,
yeah, we have to go there.
He has been trained here.
But cats are good.
We are going to lose many good
I was
chances.
told that the Facebook algorithm, I don't know if David Farrell can confirm, is programmed that where you have cats and situations like that, the amount of likes might increase. Yeah, but the topic is too let's say, too serious to make jokes. I think it's also obvious from what Emilio have said that there needs to be a bit more direct communication between the decision makers in science policy and the scientific community. It seems that although many of the decision makers come from the scientific community, there seems to be a discrepancy in communication in many countries. And somehow, I don't know, if there is a missing link, maybe we could work on that. Edouard Brezin, I want to turn to you also on this issue of brain drain and brain gain. I mean, France is a very attractive country for many people. I remember the words of President Emmanuel Macron saying after the US decided to get off the Paris Agreement, climate scientists in all the world come to France. And he said it in English, and it sounded really convincing. I was in touch with somebody from Station F in Paris. This is a huge new innovation hub. It seems that France is going really on this fast track of being a key player in this international research competition. And at the same time, you know that you have historic connection and Francophone connections to a big part of the whole globe. You know that there is criticism, you know, people saying, okay, rich countries like France can afford to make brain gain. We cannot afford to make brain gain because we are a poor country. And we invest in our people, and then they go to France and we lose the money. And at the other point of view is that those people send remittances back to their home countries. How do you see this polarization, this asymmetry, or is it an asymmetry? How do you see this issue?
There's obviously an asymmetry between African, French-speaking countries and mainland. That's the asymmetry is obvious. Now, I would say that still everybody is gaining from this situation. It's not by closing borders that we are going to solve it. I have made trips to North Africa, to Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and I've been wonderfully pleased to talk to colleagues who had exactly the same culture, the same, even outside of science, we shared exactly the language, the views, etc. So I think it's in other words, the problem exists, no doubt, of the asymmetry. However, the asymmetry is not solved by saying, well, we cut it so that it becomes symmetric. No, this is impossible. I think we should all be aware of it, pay attention, organize things like the ICTP in Trieste and many summer schools and things like that, in which we can bring together people of various origin, but there is no other way of doing science. And you, Lucian, you started with your global academic diaspora. It's still like that in science. If you people don't, I mean, people are not happy to exile. They don't choose to go to a different country because it's not a pleasure. Their family, their roots, their language is left behind. And this is not pleasant. So if people do it, it's because this is the only way they find to express themselves, what they have in them, in most cases. So we should not consider that this is an economic problem. If we just change salary, it will be okay. You have to give means to people to work at home if you want home to still flourish. And now the language issue that you just mentioned for Italy is of course true in France as well. As you know, the French are very sensitive to the French language, and still in my institution, the École Normale, a few years ago, we decided that all lectures and seminars would be in English. It's a pain, we don't speak English well, but that's the only way because we have international students. And that's it, that's life nowadays. I would have liked the whole world to adopt French as a language. It happened that it's English. Well, too bad, but this is the only way to get the world together.
Yeah, thank you also for the French, but it's true also in the case of Israel. It gives you again this feeling of being at home, you know, and this is important. At the end of the day, scientists are also people. But you mentioned something very important is borders, crossing borders. And I think that we need to think on global migration of talented people beyond borders. And this relates to my next question to Mario Pianta. Well, COVID-19, although it is a pandemic per definition is a global epidemic, disease, virus spreading, infection. At the beginning, the reaction was to close national borders. Everybody did that. So my question is, how do you think that this will influence the way mobility of talents and brains is going to happen? And I just want to give you one data from yesterday. We had a big news headline in Germany. Even in pandemic times, we had the highest number of students wanting to start their studies in Germany from abroad, about 67,000, a record number. How do you explain this discrepancy?
Germany is gaining from a situation of increasing asymmetries. So the success of Germany is a testimony of the strong investment that was made there in research, university, and innovation. But at the same time, it comes at a price for other European countries, which are providing a large number of these students. So I expect that the COVID pandemic will change many things in the way international science activities are carried out. First of all, with the German exception aside, I expect to have a collapse of the number of international students. In the US and in the UK, many universities which were receiving thousands of third world countries rich students paying very high fees are finding a collapse of their students enrollment in the context where new teaching services online are replacing the traditional way we carry out our teaching and provide services to students. So there's going to be a major crisis and transformation in the way university teaching is carried out, and is not. I don't think this is going to be a temporary phenomena during the lockdown phases, but major changes will be take place. There will be overall lower student mobility and probably also lower postdoc mobility, considering the uncertainty associated with the pandemic. And in this context, I think we have to recognize a major strength of Europe, which is the public nature of education, the public nature of university funding, because they are more resilient in terms of retaining their staff and working condition. In the US and in the UK, we have been seeing in these months experiences of universities which have been reducing teachers' wages, laying off teachers and researchers, even closing down or making mergers and acquisitions of universities, faculties, and so on. So the market-based private model is likely to be hit in a serious way, and the public university system of Europe may be strengthened. So this is a good opportunity to have policies to respond to the crisis of the pandemic with greater attention and greater concentration of resources on research, university, and education. And this could be an important opportunity to build up the opportunities in Croatia, in Poland, in Italy, as well as in other poorer countries in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Mario. You mentioned something which should be the end of our discussion, towards the end of our discussion. And I like it because we moved from a personal narrative point of view to a framing, and now we are getting, okay, to the question, you know, when somebody who is a student, a young scholar is looking at us and is saying, okay, what should be done? Because it's obvious that there are dysfunctionalities, and it's obvious that we need active measures to rebalance brain gain and brain drain, because it's not going to work if only a few get the most talents in the world and the rest is just sending them up. You know, we can leave the things as they are if we are selfish, or we put, let's say, a more nationalistic approach to everything. But we all know here that science doesn't function like that. It's not closed international borders, but I think that the universal language of science is to be in some kind of international contact. So about those measures, and now, because we don't have much time left, I will take only one question from what has been written in the chat. And it's the same question that I wanted to pose, is what would be your message? And please put it very shortly in one sentence if it's possible. What should be done? What are the measures to rebalance this asymmetry between brain drain, brain gain, the science gap, particularly in Europe, between the East and the West, North and South? And what would be your main message at the end to decision makers from science, from politics, from economy, and to people, young scientists in science. Please, whoever wants to start, I don't know. I would start with my screen. It's Ivan, it's the first to the left.
I would just make a message to young people, because their future, I would stress that they should trust their talents. They should understand that the world, as well as science, is becoming a global village, totally interconnected. And the future is gonna enable us all to be in the virtual circulation of knowledge within the countries. That's a positive message, and just commonly, they should just invest in their education and talent.
Thank you. Hvala lijepa. The next one is Edouard Prezon.
Well, I'm scared by the fact that the pandemics, the effect that it may have on the young people. It's already very bad on education, as we see. We see that there is an article in Nature recently on the number of graduate students and postdoc who are getting mentally depressed because they are isolated. So we should do something to watch with the young people to break the isolation due to the pandemic. We should convince our decision makers that they should not use the pandemics to lower the number of positions, which I think is a tendency that we may see in the UK and the US. And so it's a dangerous situation for the future of science and academic. And I think we have to do something, all of us, in particular to protect the isolation of the young people.
Thank you. Next is Jacek Kolanowski, please.
So I would just maybe second what Ivan said. For young people, I would say just go out there, try to immerse yourself in experiences at different places, because this gives you an invaluable and not reproducible value to your development as a human being, but also as a scientist. And for the policymakers, I would like to maybe just raise one thing. We just are negotiating as a European Union, lowering the budget on science from 7.1 to 4.3% on the Horizon Europe. I think this is what we should, as scientists, strongly oppose. We saw science is so important in the situations like pandemic and others. And I think that's the worst shot in your feet you can do in that particular time. Thank you.
Thank you. That's another issue, and also the issue of the widening funds in Horizon Europe, what to do with them and how to do it. We leave it for the next time. Next on my screen is Emilio Campana. Very short message for the final.
Very short message. My suggestion is to the young people is to carefully check the opportunities in other countries and their research fields, and then make the best possible choice. But I have a second suggestion, which is don't burn the bridges. When real opportunity exists within the context of coherent internal policies and investment in science and technology, returning to home country becomes an attractive option for young immigrants, researcher immigrants. So they can come back to their own country, not only Italy, but speaking about in general, and help the country after a period of training, a period of experience in international environment. So my suggestion is look, check, select, go, but then try to come back if possible.
Okay, thank you. That's a great message. Next one in my screen is David Harel. Please, your final message sentence.
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that everyone just said. I just want to add one point which relates to something Jacek mentioned. I think we should also make clear that it's not only the pandemic which is causing problems and wreaking havoc in what is happening in science and brain drain and brain gain, but also the fact that the fake news era is causing policymakers to underestimate science in a very, very frightening and devastating way. And one of the things we should fight for is for truth, for the fact that science stands for doubting and figuring out what is really true, logical thinking, structural thinking, basing decisions on fact. And this is something that too many governments are beginning to run from. And this is something that scientists should fight. And this will make policymakers make better policy. If policymakers base their policies on what scientists stand for, things will be much better, including the issue of young generations of science.
Thank you, David Harel. Very good point, and very good marketing for young people, students, to start a scientific career, because we see it's a lot of disinformation, but at the end of the day, the questions, the answers for COVID-19 come from science. And the last one on my screen and in the panel is Mario Pianta. Your final message.
Well, I guess the most important direction is to increase efforts in education on the side of students and the side of national systems, because we need more knowledge and we need more people with the capabilities to develop new knowledge. At the same time, we have to combine advancement at the frontier of science with the broadening of the capabilities in peripheral regions, in peripheral countries, in order to reduce the inequalities within the and the asymmetries within the research system. And so the opportunities of the Recovery Fund, the Next Generation Europe, should be definitely devoted to a large extent to a convergence effort in the basic capabilities in university education and research.
Thank you all. Goodbye, stay healthy, and let us meet again in person or virtually to talk about that. Thank you. Grazie. Bye-bye.
Bye.